Chapter 3. The Fridge on the Grid. To clarify one thing off the bat, colloquially, most people, including myself, conflate the terms web and internet. And that's obviously fine. Language is just like that. But technically speaking, there is a fundamental difference that I will briefly explain because it is relevant to this chapter. So the internet refers to this infrastructure of computer networks and standardized protocols that we talked about in the previous chapters, whereas the World Wide Web is its own set of software, standards, and protocols nested on top of this structure of the internet. To quote the inventor of the web, the internet is like the electric grid. The web is like a fridge. It was on that grid. And so actually most of the time when we're talking about the internet, what we really mean is the fridge. Oh, right? And this is understandable because if it weren't for home appliances, the electric grid would be meaningless to the population at large. It is only through the fridge that we grasp the value of the internet. So, with that in mind, let's have a look at how this fridge came into being. Tim Berners-Lee was born in London in 1955 to a pair of mathematicians, both of whom were involved in the programming of one of the first commercial computers, the Manchester University Mark I. In this setting, it perhaps comes as no surprise that Tim Berners-Lee grew up with an appreciation for mathematics and complex problems. In his 1999 book, Weaving the Web, which is the main source for this chapter, he describes his father wrestling with the question of how a computer might develop intuition and make connections similarly to how a human brain does that. This question stayed with him, planting the seed for his future invention. Later in life, after getting a degree in physics and working at various companies, mostly helping them keep up with and adapt to the microprocessor revolution, which is something I'm surely going to talk about at some point, Tim Berners-Lee got a research position at CERN, C-E-R-N, that famous Swiss research institute with its enormous underground particle colliding facilities. You know it. It was there that he found himself with the time and freedom to put his ideas into practice. In 1989, over the course of several months, he drew from existing concepts in pursuit of what by then had already become a concrete vision. One such concept was hypertext, which Tim Nelson had originally written about and coined the term in 1965 as becoming the standard text form of the future. Hypertext. Such hypertexts would allow for linking so that details could be further delved into and citations could link back to their source, and etc. One task was to encode such texts, and to do so, Berners-Lee borrowed from an existing framework called SGML, and the result was HTML, Hypertext Markup Language. You've probably heard of HTML before, and if you're currently watching this, then you can right-click on your website and view page source, and then you're going to look at some HTML, right? HTML hypertext is a website, okay? It's a text with other elements in it, you know? Images, ads these days. Just to clarify what we're talking about here. So in a short amount of time, he programmed the first web server, as well as the first browser, as well as developing the Hypertext Transfer Protocol, or HTTP, and the concept of URLs. The very first URL, pointing to the very first website, is actually still online today. It's info.cern.ch, and it's worth checking out if you're interested in learning more about this history. I recommend you do. Tim Berners-Lee readily admits that all of the pieces for his invention were already out there. Most significantly, the internet itself. And all he had to do was marry them together. On a side note, he also admits that there's no reason for the HTTP to be followed by 2 slashes. You get http://. It seemed like a good idea at the time. Today, looking back, it seems surprising or strange that there were very few initially who saw much potential in his invention. In fact, as he writes in his book, though he had enormous conviction in his vision himself, during the time developing the web, he was constantly worried about losing his position over, wasting time on something whose value his employers and his colleagues did not recognize. With the help of one colleague who did share his enthusiasm and was both maybe a better communicator than Berners-Lee and better connected within CERN, Robert Caillot. Apparently everybody mispronounces his name. You tell me, Robert Caillot. The technology slowly began to gain traction inside of the Institute. And outside, a steadily growing number of random enthusiasts, mostly in the US, began picking up his freely shared code and experimenting with their own web servers and notifying him every time a new web server went online. There were a few competing ideas at the time to the web. One was called Gopher, a technology developed by researchers at the University of Minnesota that came close to becoming the dominant paradigm. Instead of hypertext, the Gopher protocol allowed for the sharing of data through a layered menu system. However, when the owners of this technology announced that they would introduce licensing fees for non-academics to access it, user numbers plummeted, condemning Gopher to obscurity. It still exists, but you're probably watching this on the World Wide Web. Tim Berners-Lee took note of this, right? And he drew the conclusion that in order for the World Wide Web to become widely adopted or be truly universal, it would have to be completely royalty-free. And while in his book, he explicitly contradicts the notion that he had disdain for money and frequently asserts that he has no issue with corporations using the web for financial gain, he also clearly didn't conceive of the web as a vehicle for his own economic success. Let me quote him here. This is interesting. People, and I'm not going to do his accent. I don't know how the fuck. People have sometimes asked me whether I am upset that I have not made a lot of money from the web. In fact, I made some quite conscious decisions about which way to take my life. What is maddening is the terrible notion that a person's value depends on how important and financially successful they are, and that is measured in terms of money. That suggests disrespect for the researchers across the globe developing ideas for the next leaps in science and technology. Core in my upbringing was a value system that put monetary gain well in its place, behind things like doing what I really want to do. To use net worth as a criterion by which to judge people is to set our children's sights on cash rather than on things that will actually make them happy. Early on, when the earliest predecessor to today's Firefox browser named Mosaic started becoming wildly popular, to the point where some people were actually equating the browser itself with the web. In a way, they were conflating the door of the fridge with the electric grid. Berners-Lee did briefly consider starting a company around his own browser. He decided against this, however, feeling as though a better use of his time would be to help preserve the integrity of his invention. And so, he instead founded the World Wide Web Consortium, the W3C. And the purpose of this consortium was to develop the standards and protocols of web technology And it was composed of fellow researchers and was hosted by MIT. And they're still doing that. And Tim Berners-Lee is still the president of the W3C. While there is so much more to talk about, there's a great number of lessons and tidbits to explore around the birth of the web and Tim Berners-Lee. I'd like to close out this chapter with his views on the threat of monopolies. The web's infrastructure can be thought of as composed of 4 horizontal layers: the transmission medium, the computer hardware, the software, and the content. The independence of these layers is important. When I turn on the television, I don't expect it to deliberately jump to a particular channel, or to give a better picture when I choose a channel that has the right commercials. I expect my television to be an impartial box. I also expect the same neutrality of software. I want a web browser that will show me any site, not one that keeps trying to get me to go back to its host site. When I ask a search engine to find the information it can on a topic, I don't expect it to return just the sites of companies that happen to advertise with or make payments to the search engine company. If a search engine is not giving me completely neutral results, then I should be told about it with some notice or icon. More insidiously still, it could also be possible for my ISP, my internet service provider, to give me better connectivity to sites that have paid for it, and I would have no way of knowing this. The web's universality leads to a thriving richness and diversity. If a company claims to give access to the world of information and then presents a filtered view, the web loses its credibility. So far, the urge to achieve dominance has driven the quality on the web upward, but any one company's attainment of it would destroy the web as we know it. And at the time, Tim Berners-Lee was actually quite optimistic, as evidenced by his conclusion. Happily, the web is so huge that there's no way any one company can dominate it. All the human effort people and organizations have put in all over the world to create websites and homepages is astoundingly large, and most of the effort has to do with what's in the web, not the software used to browse it. The web's content and thus value will continue despite any one company's action. Oh, Tim Berners-Lee. I mean, fair enough. It's not one company. I'll be revisiting aspects of these chapters on the origin of the internet in the future, I'm sure, but I hope I've provided somewhat of a neat little overview, okay? The next part is going to be rough. But before I get onto that, next week I'm going to go on a bit of a digression. And there is no way in fuck that you are going to be able to guess what that digression is going to be about. So look forward to that. Go listen to Tim Berners-Lee talk about something. The guy's still right about a bunch of shit. Go in peace. I will see you around.